You're listening to Autumn on the Air, the weekly podcast that brings you conversations about the impact of research commercialization and the people who make it happen. Join us for interviews with patent and licensing professionals, innovators, entrepreneurs, and tech transfer leaders on the issues and trends that matter most. Keep listening for an inside track on the people, IP policies, and politics changing our world.
Autumn's annual licensing activity survey polls U.S. universities, hospitals, and other research institutions about metrics related to technology transfer. With 3 decades of collected metrics, the survey provides the definitive benchmark for measuring the impact of academic research innovation. The 2021 licensing survey, which was just released this week, is available for purchase through the Autumn website. Thank you to Elsevier and the Canada Foundation for Innovation for sponsoring this year's licensing survey. Without their generous support, this survey would not be possible. Today, I'm joined by John Miner, Chair of the Autumn Metrics and Surveys Portfolio and Assistant Director in the Office of Technology Transfer at the University of Central Florida. John manages intellectual property portfolios and secures intellectual property rights within the physical sciences, building and maintaining relationships with faculty and student inventors, as well as industry partners and entrepreneurs. He holds a Bachelor of Arts in Organization Communications and a Master of Science in Research Administration from UCF. John has been working on the Autumn surveys as a volunteer since he became a member in 1999, starting with the salary survey. He has worked on each salary survey since then. John expanded his survey work to include the licensing survey a few years ago, eventually becoming the chair of the Metrics and Surveys Committee. Welcome, John. I'm so happy to have you here on the air.
Hey, Lisa, thanks for having me.
Yeah, I'm super excited to have you on the show today. And to kick things off, I'm curious to know how you became involved with the licensing survey. Have you always been a numbers guy?
Well, not so much a numbers guy. I love data. I love trends. And quite frankly, I love charts. That's really where my love of this kind of comes. I do. I love what they can tell you. You know, you can get down to something and you know, you don't have to get, you know, I don't have to be a statistics nerd, so to speak, but you can still understand the concept. So that's what really drew me in. But no, I started doing the surveys at Autumn my first year ever when I volunteered. I joined Autumn in 1999 as a student. I was still an undergrad, and they were just starting the salary survey. They had just started it, and it was with Dana Bostrom and Ashley Stevens. And so I thought, well, that sounds interesting. I mean, if I was going to do this as a career, maybe I should know how much this career pays. And so I participated in that first salary survey, and then I kept doing them after that. And, you know, eventually I took over the survey for salary. And then a few years ago, I started working more closely with Reagan Robertson, who was the last chair of the Metrics Committee. He you know, sort of pegged me for the next committee chair and asked me to start helping on the licensing survey. I've been a long-time user, you know, sort of first-time editor, if you will, because that was one of my roles here in my day job was, you know, filling out the licensing survey. So I feel like I have about 20 years of licensing survey experience as a user. And then the last few years I've been working on it, you know, editing and publishing. So that's how it all kind of came to be.
And that's pretty impressive that you joined Autumn as a student and right away you jumped in and volunteered and you joined to work on the survey.
Yeah, I mean, this was my first professional job, so to speak, and I had never been to a conference before. It was New Orleans in 1999, and I was so impressed with just Autumn in general and everything I learned from that. I mean, it was just like fire hose of information and just how everyone was so cool and so nice. And, you know, I got to meet people from universities in my state, other, you know, all over America, the world. And yeah, it just made a huge impression on me. And I just was like, wow, I can learn so much from all these folks. And yeah, since then, I've been ride or die for Autumn.
That's a great story. So let's turn back to the survey a little bit more. And I think when most of us think about a survey, we think about being asked to provide feedback on a product or service. But the AUTM Licensing Activity Survey is a little bit more involved than rating your typical Starbucks experience on a scale of 1 to 5. Tell me a little bit about who takes this survey and the kind of questions they're asked.
Sure. So, this is really geared towards anyone in tech transfer, but really from like the academic federal lab research side of the house. We're not so much interested in the like statistics from Lockheed Martin per se, but we want to know what's happening in universities, research labs, hospitals, federal labs, that type of, member or user, if you will, from the AUTM perspective. And really the questions that we're asking, this is the nitty gritty of tech transfer. All the normal statistics, how many patents are you applying for? How many are issued? Disclosures, research expenditures, licensing income, reimbursements. I mean, we try to track just about every metric that's of importance to the individual office, but then sort of like the holistic overall view, right? Like what does the industry need to know, or, where the trends are going. So those are really what the questions are about and who it's for.
Now, as a tech transfer professional and longtime AUTM member, I'm sure you're very familiar with the fact that most people outside the field really don't understand what tech transfer is and even why it's important. So how do the findings of the licensing survey help in telling the tech transfer story?
Yeah, well, I mean, to me, it sort of frames it, right? This puts it in a perspective that you don't necessarily see if you just focus on a technology or a specific school, right? This will help you understand the totality of what we all do and how we're all sort of pulling in the same direction. Because, you could be an ag school in a real rural part of the South, and you may not feel connected to an MIT or a Stanford, but we are all pulling in the same direction. And I think it's important to realize that we're all part of this larger kind of movement, if you will, right? So, I think that that's really the benefit of this. This helps frame it, and it puts it in the terms that I think most people understand. I like to, when I first got into this job, I had someone say to me, you need to be able to explain technology like you're talking to your Nana. Right? If your Nana, your grandmother can understand what you're talking about, then you're doing a good job. And I really feel like that is apropos to the survey. My Nana may not understand, genomics per se, but she understands like how important it is to find cures for diseases, or, the impact that research can have when we're talking about, eradicating, diseases or improving telecom or what have you. So as long as you can frame it in I think a larger picture, if you will, like just to let people see, number one, how much of this is going on. I don't think a lot of people understand what happens at a university, right? They think, you're pumping students out, there's some faculty, but they don't necessarily understand that this is a place of innovation and that actual products are coming out and like meaningful products are coming out. So this, and I would also, shout out to the Better World Project, right? Because that's a great tool that kind of goes hand in hand with the AUTM licensing survey to give you some of those individual stories of like, meaningful technologies. But this really helps you see that like, wow, we're talking, $80 billion in research, right? I mean, huge numbers that are just, they're kind of mind boggling when you put it all together.
It sounds like the way you're describing it, it's a way, the licensing survey is a way to quantify the impact of tech transfer in a way that the public can understand.
Yeah, 100%. Because again, I think it's just important, like communication. When you're talking about a huge organization, right? I'm in a large university, communicating to the community and the shareholders can kind of get lost sometimes. Maybe there's a big football school or, there's just a lot of moving parts at a university. And sometimes I think like tech transfer could maybe get lost in the noise. But when you see it at this level and you see the impact that this can have on not just a national scale, but on a global scale, and you see how many countries are now investing in tech transfer, they're bringing up their own organizations. in the developing worlds and stuff. It's impressive.
Well, John, I think we all know it's human nature to want to compare ourselves to others. So I imagine many tech transfer professionals like to use the licensing survey data to see how their institution matches up against the top performers, as well as against their peers. How valuable is it for tech transfer offices to have that kind of benchmarking tool?
Well, I think, personally, I think it's critical, right? I mean, I'll throw out that Isaac Newton quote, right, about, if I've seen further, it's because I'm standing on the shoulder of giants. I think that this survey can be used to help. Number one, you're lifting all boats when you're sharing this data, right? And, I've been in this particular institution for over 20 years. And when we started, I was the only employee, right? And when you're talking about, 10 disclosures a year versus someone who's pulling in hundreds of disclosures a year, you don't feel like you're connected. But when you use this data, and you can, especially with the power of the STATT database, right, you can pin down exactly who are your peers, right? It's not just geographical, but, am I an ag school? Am I an HBCU? What's my research expenditures versus someone else? Now, I think it's important that you identify both your peers, but your aspirational peers. If I want to, bring deals like Stanford and MIT, well, how do they do it? And a lot of this can be, accomplished through the data, right? You can get a lot of these answers and figure out some of the best practices without necessarily having to interview every single tech transfer office. So I think it's really powerful. You get these long-term data sets. It's rare to see this type of continuity, I think, in a survey where you can go back to the 90s and, the early 90s to see what these trends are. Because in our time, in the tech transfer, last 20 years, we've seen so many, ups and downs, whether it's, the startup boom and bust, you're seeing, just the revenue, the research funding. So there's all sorts of trends that move, independent of each other, so to speak. But, when you look at it in the totality, you get a better idea of well, am I spending too much on, foreign filings versus my peers? How can I get better, patent reimbursements? And, that's important. But I think one other thing that's a benefit of this is that you're not just using this tool to compare yourselves, but you're able to toot your own horn, right? Because half of what we do is about our own publicity within the institution, as well as outside to shareholders and stakeholders, right? I need to be able to go to my VPR and say, hey, we're doing fantastic. We're, compared to our peers, we're getting tons of reimbursements on our patent expenses, and we're doing great on, patent issuances. Can I improve in this area? Yeah, maybe, but you're able to use this tool to really help, I think, spread the word internally to the important administrators, but externally you can, use it to find other institutions that you match well with, make better connections with them, and maybe learn something from them.
Curious, I've never taken the licensing survey. I'm a patent attorney, so not likely to happen anytime soon. But I'm curious, how many different metrics do you measure in the licensing survey?
Oh wow, it's a lot. I don't think I could give you the exact number, but it's at least 20, 30 different metric points. We have something we call the big six. And it's we want to know research expenditures, issued patents, licensing income, some of those really baseline numbers that almost everyone is going to have. We get into some really, specific areas when we talk about, new products, how many startups are in your area, are they small companies, large companies that are doing the licenses? So we can get very, very nuanced and very detailed with some of this data. But again, I think it's not necessarily more is better, but there's, we have a lot of moving parts here, and certain things are just, valuable to know across the board.
So, John, you mentioned about looking at trends and looking at how metrics change over time, and you alluded to this STATT database. Can you tell us a little bit more about that database and how exactly that allows you to look at these trends and how these metrics change over time?
Yeah, sure. So STATT is a great tool. In the old days of AUTM, they would print out the survey and you would basically have to do this yourself, right? You'd have to create Excel tabs, or, you'd have to try to import this from a PDF and try to do these things, that way. When STATT came about, it became so much easier to actually use and digest the data, to pick institutions by state, or compare by research size. You can sort and it's an incredibly powerful tool, I think, and I'm extremely glad that AUTM has gone in that direction, because this industry in particular, tech transfer, relies a lot on sort of the early, I'm going to call them the early pioneers, right? We have a lot of institutional knowledge and legacy knowledge that I think would be lost otherwise, right? Like there's people like, again, I'm going to, call out Ashley Stevens, right? Because the man he's been around forever in AUTM. He's touched everything, and he has such a great grasp of all of it. But there's only one Ashley Stevens. We can't all be Ashley Stevens. And so to be able to have this tool where I can digest data, I can run it how I want to run it, it just becomes, I think, really important. And again, like I said, this is you can look at it over all of our history. You can see the growth of the survey, where the first surveys weren't that, well responded to, comparative to where we are today. And, you see the growth of these different institutions, and it's a fantastic tool. And I really like that you can just get into it and use it. It's really intuitive.
And how many responses do you get to the licensing survey?
Well, several hundred. We send it out to just about every institution, whether they're a member or not. We try to include them. It fluctuates, I would say, year to year, just because, and this last year was, I'd say, kind of a challenge for us, because, you can read the report and see there was a huge, or I'll say a very noticeable decline in the employment numbers. We've lost, almost 20% of the staffing at tech transfer offices. So, consequently, you'll have directors leave positions, change, retire, and, maybe their contact information wasn't updated and we didn't get a response from an institution one year. So, one of my goals moving forward is to make sure that, number one, we're getting all the institutions that want to report are getting an opportunity to report, that we're keeping, track and tabs on all of the members so that we can get answers. This is not an easy survey, right? I'll be the first to admit it. I'm a user. I've done it for years. There's a lot of data that we're collecting, and we're pulling a lot of data. And, so it takes time, it takes effort. And, sometimes, the office is crazy and you don't have time to put it down like that. And, so those are some of the challenges sometimes that we have to deal with this survey. But I think it's, like I said, it's critical. I think it's a great importance. And again, the more respondents that we can get, the more institutions that participate, the better the data is for everyone. You get just a cleaner, clearer picture of what's really happening.
And I assume anybody who's listening to this podcast who's at an institution that maybe didn't get a survey or is interested in participating, they can reach out to you directly to be included for next year's survey.
100%. And at the upcoming annual conference, I will be at the AUTM booth. We're going to be, not only discussing the survey and taking, questions and comments, but we're going to be updating contact lists on the fly. So if you come in and say, hey, that guy's been retired for years, I'm the new director, great. We're going to put it right in right then. And we're going to make sure that the reach is getting out there. That's my main goal. I want to see as many respondents as possible for this survey and future surveys.
Yeah, and John, I wanted to turn back to the data a little bit. And I think people whose work's related to research know all too well that almost all data has some limitations that need to be considered when doing an analysis. And certainly this is quite a complex analysis. What's the best way for the licensing survey users to make meaningful comparisons between institutions or time periods?
You have to really find comparisons that make sense for your institution. I think this is a very, almost individualized kind of aspect of this. Like, you need to find normalization, right? You can't, again, it doesn't make sense to compare an ag school or a land grant school with a, predominantly, urban city school, right? I can't compare to someone who's got $1 billion in research expenditures if I'm only barely getting 100 million in research expenditures. So finding that like sort of normalization, using things like the herd data, which, can provide a good foundation from like a research expenditure side and sort of normalizing data off of that. And then I also think you got to compare across multiple fields. Because if you just look at it again in a total aggregate manner, you may not be seeing where you are doing well. And again, it fluctuates. Some years you may be better in this area or worse in this area. But I think you almost got to do that sort of like the Moneyball, the movie, right? You got to look at the numbers behind this, and it has to make sense. You can't necessarily just go with the emotional side of tech transfer, where you hear a faculty member, pitching a technology that could cure cancer, solve the world energy problems, that kind of thing. And those are all great, and we all want that. But you kind of have to also look at the numbers. I don't know many offices that have a budget that would support infinite patent filings.
Most corporations don't have that either.
Exactly. There you go. Right. So, you have to be mindful, right? And again, I'm at a state, I'm a public institution. I have a responsibility to the state and the taxpayers. I can't just be throwing money on, worldwide patent filings for, some of these things. So, I like that movie Moneyball for that reason. You gotta, and, again, I think this is a positive when you look at a small office, right? You only have a couple of employees. You don't have a huge budget. You need to chase that data and see like, well, where are our strengths? What do we need to be aware of? Where can we make the best ground up? So I think that's important. And then I would also maybe add, it's important to figure out from your organization, like, what do you care about, right? Like, are you a service over profit center? Are you only concerned about startups or, the growth of your patent portfolio? Do you only care about how much royalties you're bringing in? I mean, so finding the meaning. I think there's an author, Guy Kawasaki, right? He's all about find the meaning, and then the money will find its way to you. But if you're just chasing the money, you're going to have a hard time because you probably won't get the money, and you're not going to find the meaning in what you're doing. So, I look at it that way. What's important to you? Align your goals with that, and then use the data to like make your case along those lines.
Well, John, you mentioned earlier that you've worked on this survey for a really long time, and it's hard to believe that the licensing survey has been around for 3 decades, which I think makes it a member of the millennial generation, if I'm not incorrect there. So how would you say the survey has changed during its lifetime? Do certain metrics go in and out of fashion, so to speak?
Yeah, and it's definitely changed. I'm just the latest caretaker, right? So there's, like I said, many other people before me who have, been running this and sort of keeping it going, right? So certainly it's changed over time. We've added questions, we've removed questions. The number of respondents grows. You're seeing, well, and then, plus a lot of people are using this now, right? I mean, this becomes an important tool. So now more people are looking at it. So that's, some of the basic ways I think it's changed. But certainly I've seen, the changes in certain areas like startups, right? There was a period of time when, startups was all anyone was concerned about. How many companies are you spinning out of your university? Are your incubators up and running? I mean, then it kind of died down a little bit because people realized, well, it's not maybe all about startups. Maybe it's about other things, right? So, we've definitely changed it over time. We've added some different questions about gender. We've removed questions about like reimbursements. Like there was a kind of a weird question about your licensee paying legal fees to the attorneys, and like, do you track that? It was a very, lightly responded to question. So we weren't getting a lot of data, good, like meaningful data out of it. So we took that out, and it's, we want to be mindful of this survey, right? Like it can't just grow infinitely. I mean, so you have to be, sort of careful about how much you're adding to it. Certain things just aren't ever going to go away. Like we always want to know, like, what's your royalties? How many patents? But there's, certain things that we can tweak and we can add, and have certainly been, modified over time.
John, you mentioned about adding and taking away questions. You mentioned adding a gender-specific question. What's the process like for adding or taking out a question?
Right. So we have committees, right? We take, obviously, comments from the AUTM membership, and we try our best to address everyone's concerns. But the process is really, kind of simple. Shoot us a note, join the committee, participate as a volunteer with AUTM. But like, in the last couple of years, and one thing that we do with the licensing survey, which is, I think, really nice, is that we have a supplemental section at the end. And those supplemental questions change just about every year. Sometimes we get such a good response rate that it transitions over to be a permanent question, right? We have asked in the past about, well, how many interinstitutionals do you do? We got a lot of responses. So we put that in there now, for people. There's been obviously a lot of attention on EDI initiatives and looking at diversity and inclusion and equity. So we wanted to address that and add a question about, are you tracking, the genders of your inventors, right? And unfortunately, I'll just say, for this latest survey, about 90+% of the institutions that responded are not tracking that type of data, right? So there's some interesting responses that we get, but, we are trying to, add things that people want to hear about, meaningful things, right? I mean, like there was we had questions about COVID when we did the surveys during the COVID time, right? Asking about staffing and, working remote and all that. And, those questions don't have to come back. I mean, we've done it. We've seen it. I mean, the landscape has changed dramatically. And this year's survey, you'll see there was some pretty steep declines in the staffing rates for a lot of these offices, almost 20%, which is a huge drop. We've never seen that kind of drop. Usually it's always been increases, right? We've added a couple, but this last year, we're starting to see, or at least for the 2021 data, it'll be interesting to see if 2022, which we're going to be launching here this month, it'll be open by the time the annual conference comes around. We're adjusting the time frames as well. We're trying to bring this thing back to a little bit sooner in the calendar year so that we can get the data out sooner to the members, so it's a little bit more meaningful, a little bit more impactful. But that's generally how we do it. We want to hear from the members. We want to know what they're thinking about and where their concerns are, and we'll react to that. We'll add questions based on those, and as long as it makes sense and it could be of value to people, we want to track that data.
Well, John, thanks so much for joining us today for an insightful discussion on the AUTM Licensing Survey. It was truly enlightening to hear your perspective on the industry and the survey's findings.
Oh, thank you very much, Lisa.
For our listeners, I hope you found today's conversation as informative and interesting as we did. We encourage you to check out the AUTM website for more information about the survey and other resources on tech transfer. Thanks for tuning in, and we'll be back next week with another exciting guest and topic.
Thanks for listening to Autumn on the Air with Lisa Mueller. Get social with us and share your thoughts. You can tweet us at AUTM or visit us online at AUTM.net. We'll be back next week on the air. Be sure to join us.
New to tech transfer or a seasoned pro? AUTM is the global member organization for tech transfer and is here to help you get connected, get smart, and get ahead. Whether you work in academia, research, government, business development, corporate engagement, or startups, AUTM is dedicated to supporting you through education, advocacy, networking, and promotion. Join and you'll receive 20 free live webinars, as well as meaningful discounts on meetings and courses, insider access to a vast network of colleagues to help you through challenges, and align on new technologies and the university decision makers who license them. Membership is open for 2023. Join us.